for sign-up, yeah.
Okay, awesome. I did not know Write Club's happening. I'm excited. Maybe I can redeem myself this year since I came in a really close 5th last time. Really close, I swear. No. Okay. So thank you. I'm pleasantly surprised to have this big a crowd. When I saw the crowd outside the other room, I was like, okay, I'm forgotten. Thank you for not forgetting me. So who am I? I'm a narrative design researcher. Is this loud enough? We're good? Okay. The long answer is I'm a film student turned web designer turned art student turned comic screenwriter turned programming teacher turned blah, 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 turned narrative design researcher. This is why editing is important. Point is, I did a lot of stuff, came around to narrative design, and now that's what I call myself because explaining all of this is tough. But who are you? So just show of hands, who here has written any interactive narrative, worked on a game, anything? Okay, good. Who's designed an interactive narrative? Okay. I may get to skip ahead on a lot of slides here. Who's mapped an interactive narrative, like actually made maps for it? Okay, a few of you. Okay, I'll tell you guys when you can fall asleep then. And who's coded an interactive narrative? Yay, some eager coding hands. I always love those. Okay. Twine? Okay. Other tools? Okay, awesome. I still have to spend some time. What?
If twine counts, then sure.
Yeah. Well, twine can't count. Anyway. Okay. So, as you saw from that earlier slide, I have a lot of different things that I do in life and have done. But the one that I figured I'd focus on today is this annual challenge that I have where every year in January and March, I get 60 new digital media graduate students, most of whom have had one programming class, one visual design class, 0 creative writing classes, and 75% of them are in their first year of speaking English full time. So it's a bit of a challenge. The last bit was kind of an accident. We thought it would be really cool to make our program more international, and we learned careful what you wish for because our program is very international, and it's super cool, but it's a challenge. So over the course of 12 weeks with these relatively fresh faces, I asked them to create an interactive multimedia narrative that is not a simple choose-your-own-adventure. It must not be game first, which is to say it has to be really about story. It has to be a good experience the first time you play it, not necessarily a positive one, but an enjoyable, in whatever sense, one, engaging. And it must invite replayability. Oh, and also they have to learn 3-act dramatic structure, learn character archetypes, learn basic screenwriting, cinematography, editing, and directing principles in the same 12 weeks. But somehow out of all of that, it's the prohibition against choose your own adventure that seems to actually freak them out the most, which really confused me, but that caused me to go down this line of research. So then they go home and think about it, and at least a quarter of them actually come up with something kind of brilliant. Usually things that would take at least a year to produce, but brilliant ideas. Usually we end up teaming the students up into groups of 4 or 5, and we try to build small parts of those projects, trying to get them to scale back expectations. And sometimes they don't, and we get some glorious train wrecks. I should say I have not timed these remarks to these slides, so these are not necessarily the glorious train wrecks. But often there are some amazing moments of insight and some accidental brilliance, probably some intentional brilliance too that we don't recognize till later. So the weird thing is that again and again during the project, students come back to this idea of how do you give meaningful choices without it being choose your own adventure. And you guys know the answer to this. And we give them examples ranging from Alabaster to the zombies of The Walking Dead, and they say, so we just have to add some action to our choose your own adventure, maybe a mini game. So then we go to F and G, used to be Facade, now it's Firewatch for F, G being Gone Home, of course, which students especially latch on to, which I find incredibly gratifying. And then they all decide they're going to make a story about memories triggered by objects, and therefore that must be amnesia, and therefore we end up with 14 proposals for stories about amnesia. And at first we kind of wondered if this was maybe just because the starting point for new writers of interactive fiction is the last game they played. But then we realized, because my main co-teacher and I are within a decade of each other, a lot of these reminded us of games that we played like way back when we were kids. So we actually began to wonder if maybe the problem was that a lot of our students don't have a sense of video game history. But that seemed kind of odd because a lot of our students are in their early 20s, but we also have some that are near retirement age. 2/3 of them come from China, India, North Africa, South America. There's such a diverse range of cultures and experiences and games that could influence their stories. We wondered, why did a quarter of the projects keep ending up being detective stories or amnesia stories? So this is territory that's been covered. There are still, I'm sure, many awesome amnesia stories to be told, and I love a good mystery. But we wanted to kind of see if maybe there's something else they could do. So this is the point when I actually started looking at their maps, such as the one over there on the on the left. And I started looking at sort of classic adventure maps. That's actually part of Planetfall, I believe, on the other side there. And we realized that basically we'd been sort of treating their story maps as site maps. So they were basically kind of saying, oh, well, we're going to put this on the internet, so it'll be a web page, so we'll make home pages. You can see homepage over there. And that wasn't really giving a sense of story or a sense of place. But when we tried to actually get them to map out things in terms of place, then we ended up with basically, well, I wish we ended up with Planetfall, but, you know, we ended up with sort of maps. And basically we'd end up with the classic inventory-oriented adventure game kind of thing that is great and I love playing. But again, since this class was interactive narrative, we wanted to sort of do something more, which is why I wanted to do this talk, because I really wanted to sort of show a situation where we're really pushing on this idea of, no, you can't make a game. I mean, I would love it if I could tell the students, haha, just kidding, you can make games now, because I love playing the games they make. But instead I have to be the mean teacher who's like, no, this quarter, no games. So, as I mentioned, we were trying to have them work with existing tools, and with a tight time crunch, we discovered that they often were just sort of using the tutorials and saying, oh, well, since the Undum tutorial has hit points, then we have to have hit points, and that must be how these things work. So it was sort of a strange variation on the whole language shapes thought thing. I don't know if you guys went to the session yesterday about writing if English is your second language, but here we had two cases of English as a second language plus programming as a second language. So it was kind of a pain. But then we had the overachievers.
I've seen the world, done it all, had my cake now. I am.
So these two groups, which I just put side by side to show quick clips, produced a fully interactive top-down prototype and a fully produced cutscene in the first week of the project. So we're expecting, you know, sketched prototypes, and these students are jumping ahead to this. But it's actually the advanced groups that I was more worried about and why I really wanted to do this mapping thing. Okay, another quick survey question. Who's played a really good-looking game that just didn't make sense? Okay. Who's been sorely disappointed by a game that you know has some amazing programming behind it or some amazing ideas and it's just awkward? Yeah, okay. So my secret shame, I've never finished Heavy Rain. It's the only game where I've ever actually given up and read the walkthrough and watched the YouTube videos because I just could not deal. I love a lot that's going on in it. This is not a bash Heavy Rain session. In fact, one of the things that I had to cut from this talk for length is a re-engineering of Heavy Rain that some students and I have been trying to work on. It's a theoretical exercise. We're not going to actually like make it. But we think there's enough good stuff in there. But the point is, it's difficult, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate. In fact, this is sort of the remnants of that part of the talk that I took out. This was our starting map for how Heavy Rain works. And without going into the details, and there are no spoilers in case you haven't played it in the last 6 years, in which case, get on that. But the dark area is actually the only part where there's really a lot of evidence that you're having an impact on the world. There's sort of the minor touches that happen in the first part. And that's roughly 3/4 of the story that takes place with you only sort of having these sort of cosmetic changes and being led through the story. And by the time you actually get to that part where it's super amazing what's going on, you've cut off your finger, you've calmed a crying baby, you've microwaved a pizza, you've set the table, you've run around yelling like a madman like 5 times. And so in my case, I just didn't make it to the end. Just out of curiosity, how many people did make it to the end of Heavy Rain? Awesome, you're better people than I am. So this goes without saying for this crowd, but good stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the reason we worry so much about mapping, or at least I do, and my group does, is because we want players to reach the end. Or at least a stopping point where they feel happy. Usually. Basically, as long as they don't rage quit and they say, okay, I'm stopping because I appreciate what's going on here, I'm okay if they don't get to the end. So this next part is the part where I might fast forward a little bit. I decided I would sort of go through some of the basic shapes that we look at just to sort of do a quick orienteering guide and then do one bigger worked example at the end, time permitting. So show of hands, people who are familiar with the diamond structure. Okay. Loops in stories. Just saying it, I'm sure many of you know. Okay. We'll go through these then. So the diamond, which was actually brought up yesterday in Cassie's talk about all choice, no consequences, basically is the title of her talk, all choice, no consequences. You give the player a choice. You then give them a result from the choice, and then maybe you give them some choices. In this case, I chose to use little emoji because it seemed like there is no choice. Why not? And you go back to the thing you're at. So they're great because you don't break your story, but at the same time, some writers and players hate them because they want to break their story. If you do this, you're sort of in the safe zone of, okay, I'm just kind of leading you along through my story now because every choice you make might customize what happens a little bit, but not too much. But I bring up the diamond because even though it seems like kind of an obvious loop back technique and a time saver, it's often underappreciated for the things you can do with it, such as giving the player a different way of interpreting the same events, or giving players a choice between the right road, if you believe in having a right road in your story, and the hard road. So maybe you're trying to make a fail-proof game. Maybe you don't believe in having, the death thing going on in your games. Or maybe you want to go back to the days of Infocom and infinite saves and restarts. I wouldn't mind that. Sometimes. But anyway, so maybe you give the players one way through where they just do the right thing, they solve the puzzle, whatever you're on, and then the other way is, okay, you got to do a whole bunch of stuff if you're going to get there. This is that sort of diagrammed out. It's sort of a silly example because I wanted to just keep these super simple and get to the actual meaty stuff. So the diamond here sort of reads sideways, although you start at the top with, you have to choose correctly. And from there, you can either choose wrong or right. If you choose right, you're fantastic and you miss out on going on your fabulous quest. If you wanted a shortcut in the game, great, you got it. On the other hand, maybe it's punishment for the player being wrong. So suddenly you have to go on this quest and you refuse to do it. So then you're in the dungeon. But then you're given a chance to redeem yourself. So now it's sort of a redemption story. Like, you've seen that you're a bad guy in the eyes of the king, so you're going to go on his quest. Or maybe you daringly escape the dungeon, and so now you decided that you're going to redeem yourself in the eyes of the people and go on that redemptive quest. So you might end up on the same quest 3 different ways. But in one sense, it's you volunteered. In another sense, it's you've sort of been enslaved into it. And in a third sense, you've decided to do it for, your own sort of anti-heroic tendencies. So your point of view of your motivation for the quest changes a little bit. And you don't actually have to, write any additional code or anything. You've just sort of thrown in a couple of extra writing options and ta-da, you were fantastic for whatever reason you thought you were fantastic. So this is the kind of stuff that I do with my students that drives them crazy. We play games like Spot the Diamond. And it's not the two things that are diamond-shaped is a hint. I'll just have you guys look at it for like 10 seconds. There's actually a couple of them. So this is a pretty simple story map, so there's not a lot going on, but you'll notice those aren't really diamond-shaped. And this is actually one of the things that the part of my research we're not going to get to today is getting into, which is sort of auto remapping to try to find these shapes in maps people draw. So, you know, when you draw your twine map and it's a mess, maybe you're just trying to get all your squares to line up nicely or not have too many crosses. And our concern is more, let's try to actually pull out these shapes that appear that might point to something going on in your story that is desirable or not desirable. And those of you who have done graphics programming can probably appreciate it's a pain in the neck to try to actually get a bunch of objects to move and respect each other's space and so on. And our prototyping has been using OmniGraffle, which, while a lovely tool, is not great when you get into like hundreds and hundreds of junctions on top of each other. Anyway, so here we have these shapes that are not at all diamond shaped, but there's actually two ways here where in one direction the player goes off to the side and then down, and in the other the player goes over and down and then back up. But in this case, it's not really up. They just move the node down there. So there's a lot of tricky stuff to be done with directionality as far as where are you trying to say the action actually is taking place. But if you follow the arrows, which again is part of what we're trying to automate, then you end up realizing, okay, well, pretty much all my choices are going to end up sticking me in this middle section here where something happens. But there's also something else going on here that is not so good, and that is a loop. So loops are fantastic when you're trying to hit every branch in a conversation tree, although they can make your NPCs sound like dimwits when you have the, you know, could you tell me that again? And they sometimes cause the player to realize that he or she is not making a difference in the world at all. So once again, in the interest of simplicity, although there are many complex examples on my website, here's sort of the basic loop. You have to make a decision. Okay, I did it. Great. Okay, do you think we did the right thing? Hey, we have to make a big decision again. Okay, I did it. Great. Oh, we're in a loop. So obviously there would be a way out of this loop, but it can be really frustrating if you're in something like this. This is a reduction project I'm currently working on. I will be super impressed if anyone can guess what I'm actually reducing here, and we can talk about it afterwards if you figure it out. But this is actually only Act 1 of this particular story, and I'm actually not even done with Act 1. I just had to finally 2 nights ago say this is going in as is, so my apologies. This is the cleanest version I have so far. But as you can see, there are a lot of sort of potential loopy areas. I realize you can't see the arrows very well, but you can certainly see there's a lot of areas where sort of things dovetail back into each other and you can get stuck in a corner really easily. So imagine you spend a bunch of time over there on the left side as a player and you're wandering through all these nodes and thinking, I'm making progress, and then suddenly you're back to, hey, you should investigate that same thing again. Really frustrating, and it kind of, you know, breaks the reality of your investigating this thing and you have a competent team helping you. So once again, we'll do a little practice. Can you spot the loop? So again, I apologize. The arrows may be a little small. These slides will be up on my website as well as on the GDC site, so you can look at them later if you find this game at all entertaining, by which I mean the game of spotting these things. But if you look at the arrows, you'll see that there's sort of a down, over, up loop happening on the left and on the right. So basically, we have to befriend that darn skunk, which stinks. Sorry. I know. I was reworking these slides at 2 in the morning. Give me a break. Okay. So you probably know if you're making these, if you've been writing interactive narratives for a while, but One caution I have for people is that once you start actually mapping your work out, instead of sort of having that mental separation of, oh, well, I'm the writer and I'm writing my stuff and I'll just give that to the other guy who will do the interactions or whatever, then there becomes this temptation of, oh, I'm a really creative person and this thing connects to this thing and I can totally make this work. And then suddenly you've made a whole bunch of loops you didn't mean to make, which is in fact what happened here with this student project. One member of a 5-person group came up with some brilliant ideas at the 11th hour and put them in without anyone else knowing. And yeah, it was a kind of ugly beta test. Okay. In the interest of time, skipping ahead here. So the zipper, which is one that we named ourselves, as far as I know, which I think is kind of cute, basically lets players make minor non-story breaking choices until you're ready to deal with major ones. Talk yesterday actually did a really good job of dividing things up into sort of choices and major branches. So this is sort of the choice area, and then at the bottom you have your major branch. So it's basically an extended remix of the diamond that we looked at the beginning. The difference is that with this, you're at some point planning to have a major branch that actually is important, like an avoidable death or an optional romance or something else where you actually want to sort of have where you sort of want to have people having a real effect on the story. So with the diamond, you can extend, or sorry, the zipper, you can extend the diamonds as much as you want and then branch only when you absolutely need to or when it's time to do it. One example that people may not have seen of this is Long Story, which is a really cute game that I only found recently, which surprises me given my job. But it does a really nice job of sort of balancing there's a little light mystery going on, but at the same time, you actually can have a relationship with most of the major characters. You pick your gender. You have 3 gender choices. And the game is very nice about accommodating any of those decisions in different ways. So you don't just feel like it's, hello, Marcel. You actually have some kind of sense that the story is actually going where you want it to. That being said, there are a lot of places where the story ends up sort of branching back and you're saying, well, why am I back in this weird mystery that I decided I didn't care about because I'm more interested in my boyfriend right now? But, I mean, that's the backbone of the story, so you have to get back there eventually. But what's really nice about Long Story is actually it's ironically very short episodes. So I think with the time between episodes, the Long Story folks are really able to sort of focus on, let's make sure every relationship option is meaningful and different and cool. And then, we'll have the sort of mystery story that just plays out as it does. So it's an interesting shift in priorities that works really well with the sort of zipper structure because they can jump off when they need to into these other parts. So I promised narrative mapping frameworks. So this will be the narrative mapping frameworks bit in my last 5 minutes here. But that's probably for the best because this part gets into the really dense stuff that I have a lot about online. So I created map templates to try to get my students to not basically recreate Zork or insert last game they played, with the idea being that these are just starting points. The idea is that they fill in the blanks or the lettered blanks with story idea, and they try to make a story that navigates. It's kind of like when you're in grade school and you get the 5-paragraph essay and you're told, paragraph 1 is your topic statement, paragraph 5 is your conclusion. Same idea here. The main idea, though, is to get students to not think about programming constraints, and that's why I wanted to present this to you guys as well. The idea being to really make things visible. It's really easy, especially with projects like the 2 that I showed with my superstar students who created cool stuff in the first week. It's really easy to have the coding members of the team get buried in this stuff so the writers don't really necessarily fully appreciate what's going on anymore, or maybe appreciate it but sort of don't quite understand, okay, do I assign 7 points to that? Do I assign 5 points to that? Do I have to assign points? What's going on here? So with the mapping structures, the idea is that we have sort of a more open way of visually communicating what you're trying to do. And on the writing side, the goal is to better communicate options and outcomes to your players as well. They won't actually see your map, of course, but if you can say, oh, well, over here, this is going to have a major effect, then you might be able to actually write something to hint at that. So the one template I'm going to get to is this lock and key template, which needs a new name. So if you have any ideas, let me know, because it implies puzzle, and it's not supposed to be just puzzles. And it's based just on the idea that the player needs to do X before Y can happen. It's basically Boolean logic for people who have trouble visualizing flowcharts. And it's a pretty simple idea. The idea is you have these numbered nodes, and any set that have the same number are one unit, with L and U being locked and unlocked, and K being the key. So up at the top in the zoomed in version, we have 2K, and then we have 2L that can get us to 2K, which then lets us unlock 2U. And in this case, I put them all near each other for space saving, but you can have them farther apart. But the idea is that you actually have a way of saying, no, these two things are actually the same, they're just spatially apart. Which might seem a little weird, but this worked really well with one student group, the group that actually did the really nice looking video. They decided to use Twine initially, and they actually entered the template into Twine and then typed in their story idea. And only after that did they say, okay, now let's actually start breaking this thing up and figuring out what do we really want to tell. Let's throw out this template idea and actually make it into something. What's funny is all their scribbles on the left actually ended up turning into something on the right that looked very much like the map I'd originally given them. But that's actually the physical layout of the insane asylum. The story's about a journalist investigating an insane asylum because we still can't quite get away from the broken people crazy theme of interactive fiction, but I think it's actually kind of a cool thing, so we'll go with it. Anyway, but what was really cool here is that whether accidentally or on purpose, they actually ended up sort of creating this physical landscape that mapped the mental breakdown of the woman, of sort of the, if she goes one direction, it's more into she's going to be imprisoned forever, and if she goes the other direction, then she might get out. But since there's this whole question of is she crazy or is she not throughout the story, it was a really nice thematic overlay, with puzzles and stuff, but it basically showed me they'd sort of learned something from their playthrough of Gone Home as far as like how to physically tell a story, but in a much more subtle way, even though what they were really doing here was sort of puzzle making. So sadly, we do not have time to play the game because I'm told I have 1 minute, but it is online. There's plenty more to see, however. See, I knew this would happen. This is the stuff that we're currently working on. This is not a big walking ad for my lab, which is the narrative lab at Northeastern, but I do hope you guys will come visit stuff as we start to put it up. Since mapping is kind of a reductive process, I figured I should end by sort of doing the reductive thing on my own talk, so that's the whole talk in sort of 3 things. The first 2 being things I hope everyone's doing, the last one being my advice of, if you want to tell an entirely cinematic story, well, it's actually gotten cheaper now to make a movie than to necessarily make a good game, so make a movie. Speculation about the future. So we're still in the discovery phase on games like this. Games like Gone Home, Her Story, currently all still are getting comments like, I've never played anything like this before. Each is a unique experience because the stories are so personal. But when you reduce these games to the most basic mechanics, hiding everything in plain sight through good level design, they point towards a future in which everyone will have seen something like these games. And that excites me, because if everybody has seen games like this, then maybe people will invent more games like this, and this will become just a general medium for critical comment. Maybe your game will be our generation's Ulysses, although hopefully that means your game's an interesting and challenging work, and not that everyone says they'll read it, even though they're not going to. So finally, because I know I'm over time, good stories leave the player wanting more because they relish the experience and not because it felt incomplete, unless the ending was supposed to make them feel that way, like this talk, which is perpetually to be continued. So this is my obligatory thank you because the Lowell Institute actually paid for me to be here. And here is my contact info, so I hope you will be in touch. And thank you for staying over by 1 minute. Class dismissed.